Guys, so today we're going to be talking about the movie Dogman. Now, I know this movie is advertised or is listed as for kids, but I will have to say that despite the low rating that I am eventually going to give it toward the end of this video, that I did find it to be like pleasant in the sense that it was comedic, right? Like the vibe that you get throughout the film is kind of good vibes. And you know, one thing can't be understated, that the animation quality and overall just the fun rhetoric of Dave Pilkey's writing style is always a treat, right? Like, I grew up with the Captain Underpants comics, so I kind of get it. But I actually have not read Dogman, so I went to the theater yesterday, and because it was a Thursday afternoon, I was the only one in the entire theater. So I got to sit there and enjoy the movie by myself and uninterrupted, you know, nobody making any noise. And I kind of just got to sit back and cruise in my little reclining chair. So plot of the movie is kind of ridiculous in and of itself, especially for a kid movie, right? So you have this cop who's this policeman, and he has like a partner dog. And one of the first scenes of the movie is they're trying to defuse a bomb, and the dude's like, "Oh wait, you're colorblind," because the dog's telling him what to do, and they both basically die, and they get taken to the hospital, and this nurse is like, "Oh, but what if we just cut the dog's head off and put it on the guy's body?" And I'm like, what? But it's funny, right? So they actually do it, and they save him, and he ends up becoming what is known as Dogman. So ultimately, like, I guess they didn't care about the cop, but the dog is back, and he has the bottom half of a human body, but the principle applies where he can't speak like a human because his brain and everything else in relation to how a dog would work is an actual dog. And the more interesting part to the movie, though, is the villain Petey, right? And they have this little breakdown where Petey is an evil cat, and he's constantly breaking in and out of these jails, right? And in and out of these jails, escaping for Dogman to just keep putting him back behind bars. And it's a funny little plot, like, because it kind of reminds you almost of Metro Man and Megamind, right? Those two characters, I feel like they kind of have like a fun little similarity to these guys. But of course, Petey being a brilliant scientist, if you will, as a cat, or I guess scientist is not really the correct word, but he knows a lot about these technologies, right? So he ends up buying this freaking cloning machine, and he makes a clone of himself, but he doesn't realize that there's allegedly a side effect that it has to make a baby. So you have this baby Pete, it's basically a baby cat, and it's, even though it's like depicted and you would think that it's very evil, Petey as a cat ends up realizing that he wasn't born evil. The reason he became terrible was because of Pete's dad just growing up and kind of like not doing what he needed to as a father, right? And baby Petey, or as he's known as Little Petey in this movie, he tries to bring his grandpa back to reunite with his dad to try to make him happy, to try to not make him evil anymore. But it just, you know, the grandfather is just terrible, right? Like, and for a kid's movie, you're just like, oh my goodness, this feels so, you know. But it's so funny too, because there ends up being like a item on the website that Lil Pete or Petey is trying to buy, right, for the cloning machine, and he ends up buying this undo button. So you're kind of sitting there as an adult, and you're like, yeah, you didn't want this baby, and now you have it, and now you're thinking about undoing it. So even though the movie is about Dogman, I would actually say that Petey actually is the main character of the movie, and the story actually portrays most of it from Petey's perspective. And he's pretty cool for a villain, right? He has like all these machines and gadgets that he invents. And it's like, if he just applied these principles to other things, you know, I'm pretty sure he could end up being a brilliant person and someone that everybody loves. But that's not really something that he's interested in. And he ends up trying to resurrect this corpse of this fish called Flippy. And it's so dumb because, like, they end up resurrecting a building instead, and you have like this scene, it almost reminds you of Power Rangers, where these buildings are like trying to fist fight each other, and it's like pa 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 uppercut and they're just swinging around, but you know, to speak on like what I found to be like the actual depth to the movie, I really like Little Petey's character, right? And it, I think the message of the movie, if there was one, at least for me, is it's not necessarily about the environment that you're in. It's also about how your perception on the world, you know, can change based on how you look at things with either a negative or positive outcome, right? And even though little Petey is allegedly a baby or a very small child in this film, you start to see that kind of perspective change when you first have that scene with Petey walking through this park and he's talking about how the world is crap. You can't look at anything positively. You have these muddy puddles. You have like this pollution in the water, and you know, like they talk about all this down stuff. And toward the end, Petey actually changes his perspective on the world as a whole of it being entirely negative, and looks at little Petey and he's like, you know, the world can't be such a bad place if you're in it. It's a really touching message. And it kind of, you know, it goes to show that even though he didn't want a kid, right, he still ended up being a better father than the father that raised him. And it's kind of a silly message to throw in such like a otherwise a light movie, but to be honest with you, I found it okay. Dogman, of course, like the character, even though he's portrayed as the main actual character, he doesn't really do a whole lot other than trying to catch Petey. So like the whole dynamic, and he doesn't talk either. So you have a silent protagonist, which is kind of cool. Like you don't really see that dynamic too much in movies nowadays. Like at the end of the day, like it's funny because little Petey ends up, Pete's son, of course, the small cat, he ends up not really wanting to be associated with Petey because Petey keeps throwing him to the dumps. Like there's a scene in the movie where Petey is literally trying to give away his son for free. And this lady's like, I'll give you $1 for him. And he's like, free. And she's like, how much? And it's like, bro, this reminds me back at retail jobs when customers could not comprehend basic principles. But the movie's interesting in its ending too, because they decide to split custody of Lil Petey, and Dogman ends up, I guess, becoming like a father figure for him. Of course, like the moral compass of Dogman is so strong in that regard. Like, of course, I guess the way you could frame it is that even though it's the brain of the dog, it's still the heart of the man, right? When they got into that bomb and they got split apart. It's funny too. Like there's a scene with Flippy, who's actually the main villain of the story, because Petey actually goes good trying to stop Flippy only because Flippy tries to destroy his son. Little Petey writes in this little comic book, and he's showing them that, you know, Flippy, even though you think nobody loves you, I just made a little book that shows us, you know, how good friends we can be. And Dogman has to save Petey in this scene, and he has this tennis ball that he has to shoot, and it's so sad because the tennis ball was his owner, so it's like the last item that he's ever had in affiliation with his previous owner, so he has to end up giving that up in order to save Petey. So you can't help but feel bad for the dude, right? But they both end up doing the right thing. You know, Petey ends up apologizing, and he gets pardoned by the mayor, which is kind of a big deal considering bro's been in and out of jail like 10 times at least. You see these cutscenes of him escaping. He gets these freaking balloons and he flies. It's so funny. And then he also has like this scene where he tells this big dude in the prison to jump on one side of the, what do you call it? I can't even remember what it's called. That thing at the playground that you know, you go up and down. But anyway, he gets launched in the air, and then he has another one where he just literally escapes from the actual prison. It's like, you know, the jail is the problem. It's not the fact that Dogman can't keep him in jail. He's the one that's actually arresting him. But yeah, so I overall didn't like love the film. Like, of course, I can't hate it, but I also can't give it a positive rating because I don't think there's anything like too much that spoke to me. Because I understand, right? It's a kids movie, but even for those, like, I appreciate a lot of good animated and kids films. But I didn't think that there was anything particularly special about this one. Nothing that really stood out to me. I guess on the positive notes, I do appreciate the fact that they did, in terms of Dogman, represent him accurately per the comic book portrayal. Even though I have not read it, that is something that I did look up and kind of see communicated by a lot of people and vocalized by a lot of people. So I mean, in that regard, you could call it fine as it was. Like the writing is okay. Like of course the animation style is always brilliant, right? You can't help but appreciate that when it comes to these types of movies. But you know, I honestly think that DreamWorks has made a lot of better films. So I'm really hoping to catch what they come out with next. But hopefully you guys found this one a little bit shorter, a little bit interesting. But yeah, Dogman, you know, I had some time to myself and I wanted to give the movie a run through in the theater. But I do think that the message speaks quite clearly for what it was, right? It couldn't really sugarcoat or try to hide a more subliminal message in the actual film. So, you know, it's not about your conditions of where you're raised, and it's not about who raises you. It's about you making the right decisions for yourself and ultimately doing the right thing and changing the course and not looking at the world as out to get you, but ultimately just applying yourself and doing the right actions that you know that you're capable of. And, you know, that's just the message that it speaks. And I think it's a pretty fair and pretty quite honest approach to an otherwise very lighthearted kids film. But as always, if you guys do enjoy this type of content, do let me know down below. I do try to respond to every comment. And if you have a movie suggestion to throw out there, do let me know. I am trying to stick to more recent movies, or at least movies that are either popular or relevant. But as always, hope you guys enjoy, and I'll check you around in the next one. Take care.